All right, welcome to Beginning Ham Radio. We are sponsored by the Portland Amateur Radio Club. This week's topic is Winlink, and we brought back Bruce, who's been a guest presenter a few times now, and I really appreciate you coming and helping us out, Bruce. He has taught many classes, as I understand, on Winlink and help people get set up. So he's going to talk about what it is, kind of how to get involved. Unfortunately, Winlink is kind of one of those topics that we could actually probably spend all day, possibly all week on. We'll hit the kind of the high level stuff today, and then we'll give you some resources if you want to learn more about Winlink. Thank you, Bruce, and I'm going to stop sharing, and you can go ahead and share your screen. Oh, you're muted, Bruce.
Yeah, now I'm unmuted. All right, I'm Bruce. The document that we're going to go through has way too much information. So I've put the link to it at the top, and in a few seconds I'll paste it in chat. And if you want more information, you'll find some of it in this document, but we're not going to talk about the whole document by any means. So the document starts out with a bunch of definitions, and hopefully I'll define terms as I go along, but feel free to stop me when I mention a word you haven't heard before, and I lose double points anytime I use an abbreviation that I haven't at least spelled out. So this diagram tells you something about how Winlink works, but let me tell you what it does first. One way to think about it is put yourself back 30 years when you wanted to do email, you hooked up something to your telephone, and possibly an acoustic coupler where you jammed an old-fashioned phone into these rubber cups, or perhaps a little box that sat next to your phone that you connected in with a little Y connector to your phone line. And when you wanted to do email, you dialed a magic number that made a lot of strange noises, and then you could send email and receive email in kind of a clunky fashion. So Winlink, in some sense, is going back 30 years or more. So why would you do that? Because you don't have to connect to anything but an antenna. Winlink can be used from a mountaintop where you're running your laptop off of its internal battery and your radio off of probably an external battery. It can be run on your back porch, and you do not have to be connected to a phone line, to an Ethernet cable, to whatever cable is running into your house these days for internet. And you can send email. On almost all days, that email can be routed to anyone, anywhere in the email universe worldwide. There is spam protection that we may touch on later, where if somebody gets your Winlink email address, which is not the same as your normal one, they can't easily send you email and clog up your Winlink mailbox. If you want a relative to be able to do that, you need to use one of two tricks to give them permission. If you want to send email to a few fellow ham radio operators' mailbox, you just use their call sign. And if they have a Winlink account, it will be routed to their amateur radio email inbox. So it's kind of asymmetric. It's kind of automatic. Anybody else that's a ham radio operator that has a call sign and is registered with Winlink, then there's no spam protection because we're all part of the ham radio community. But if somebody wants to send you email, they need to know the trick. And that would be sending it from outside the ham radio community. So the how part is you need a radio, and in this lower part of the diagram, that's represented by an antenna, because all radios have antennas. And you need a computer. It doesn't have to be a laptop, but it's probably going to be a laptop. And you need a way of cabling together. And we're going to spend some time on how that cabling might happen. And then you end up having your radio tuned to a frequency of another radio, typically in your metropolitan area if you're using VHF or UHF, because you're going to need line of sight to that other radio. And that other radio is referred to as a gateway. The historic term for that is remote message server, referred to by the abbreviation RMS. But most of us refer to them as Winlink gateways these days. Generally speaking, for those Winlink gateways to be able to do their job, they have to be connected to the real internet. And the real internet routes them to special high capacity servers in the so-called cloud. That looks from this diagram like they live on Amazon servers, Amazon Web Services, but you don't need to know that to do it. And those fancy servers are called common message servers. If the internet can't be reached, there is a special mode that allows you to do local email called post office mode. We may not get to that during my presentation, but I could take questions on that later if you're curious about that. That can be very relevant to emergency communication after a big earthquake, where you may not be connected to the real internet and you still want to be able to send email for emergency communications. Any questions on this rather complicated diagram? So while you're thinking of questions about this diagram, let's kind of zoom in on the bottom part of the diagram and discuss how you might connect your computer and radio to a gateway. The way that everybody did it 5 to 10 years ago was one computer, one special box called a terminal node controller, and just about any transceiver, typically a VHF transceiver, 2-meter transceiver, but could potentially be a UHF 70-centimeter transceiver. And the box in the middle, job is to convert what the computer is creating into packets that are in a proper internet format called X25. And then pass them via audio, because your transceiver expects to get things via a microphone cable that is an analog audio connection. And then when the things come back, they come back decoded as audio and come back to that terminal node controller, and the terminal node controller knows that they're packets and converts them back into a data stream and gives them to the computer. So there's a whole bunch of magic going on in that center box. The pair of lines between the terminal node controller and the transceiver, let's see, my cursor is right over there. I show one going right, one going left. Those are almost always a single cable. I'm just showing you for illustrative purposes that the right arrow represents data going to the transceiver. It also represents the terminal node controller telling the transceiver to go into transmit mode, taking the place of your finger on the push to talk button. So you don't actually have to push anything. The terminal node controller does that for you. And then when it's time for it to listen for the packets coming back, it automatically releases that signal and can receive the audio produced by the transceiver and decode the packets and send the data back to your computer. So you would buy this box for probably at least a couple $100. And as recently as 2 or 3 years ago, I was told by expert people that this is, if you want to get any decent quality, you need this box. Fewer people will say that today for a couple reasons we'll get into. And so I would not necessarily recommend you buy the box until you consider the other options, which I will show you briefly, and you can decide when later. Um, so there's a question, why would we use Winlink? There's the gee whiz factor of being able to send email without connecting to a cable in the wall. But the practical reason for me is so that you have a way of sending email if there's a major disaster. Now, we all know that we can use our radios with microphones and speakers or handhelds, so-called HTs. But if you've got significant formal information you want to get to someone, reading it, sometimes having to spell each word, takes a very long time, especially to get it right. And if you've got a halfway decent Winlink connection, you can send messages much faster, much more accurately, and they can be routed to the right person on the other end without having to be read again over another audio connection. Are there other questions about the why part that I can touch on at this point? Okay, so I won't see every message. Let's see. So will the Portland ECC be on the system? In most of our exercises, most of the communication between the subnet controllers and the Emergency Control Coordination Center is by Winlink. If you don't know about the Portland Neighborhood Emergency Team Program and the Portland Emergency Communication Center, I'm happy to answer questions about that during the Q&A, because it's one of my things, and Jim asked a question because it's one of his things. Some of you have not yet gotten involved in that, either because it's not your thing or because you don't live in Portland. But I'm still happy to answer questions about it. So let's see, did I skip one? Excuse me while I scroll around a little bit. No, I think this is the next one. Right at the top of this slide is a spill from the previous slide. An example of one of those TNC boxes is the Tigertronics KPC3, and there's a web link there. And like I said, all the details in this document are available to you by the address that I pasted into chat and is at the top of the document. So another way of doing it is to buy a very modern transceiver, actually a mobile radio that could be mounted in a truck or an automobile, but could also be used with a little power supply on your desktop. And it has a built-in TNC. The one that I have is the Kenwood TM D710G, and actually it's the GA. But I noticed just a week ago that that model's been discontinued, so it may be a little bit hard to find now, although there's probably some still available on the new and used market. I'm sure Kenwood will come out with another one any day now that also has built-in TNC. And I think there are some other models by other manufacturers that have the same features. So the advantage of that is you don't have to have the box in the middle. And the cabling is simpler because you just run one USB cable directly from your laptop or other computer to your Kenwood, and you can do Winlink. Now, there are some other digital modes that are not focused on email and don't use X25. One of them has to do with sending still pictures that has a strange name, slow scan TV, but it's really about still photographs. That can also be both good as a hobby thing and good for emergency communications. And there's another digital mode, or a collection of other digital modes that are not focused on email. Those are not supported by the built-in TNC or an external TNC. They do things by a more software method, and we'll get to them as a side point on, I think, the next slide. Any questions about this configuration where you buy a transceiver with a TNC built in? Again, TNC is short for terminal node controller, which is a fancy word for a box or equivalent that handles the internet packetting and depacketting, to abuse the English language.
So Bruce,
Questions?
I can say that
Yeah.
a lot of people in the Clackamas County areas use the
Vara?
Tigertronics. Is that right?
Yes, that'll be on the next slide.
Okay.
But thanks. That's excellent segue. I thought you were going to bring up Vara. Make sure I bring up Vara before I conclude, which is not a box, it's software. And again, some of the details I'm not going into on, actually, there's one more slide before I get to the Tigertronics. Another radio that some of us have is the Yaesu FT991. I got it because I wanted to be able to, in one box on my desk, to be able to do VHF, local communications, and occasionally distance communications via HF. Some people refer to the Yaesu FT991 as a shack in a box because it has so many different bands built into it. It's bigger than your typical mobile radio, but it can be mounted in a car or truck. I keep it on a desk connected to a power supply. And one feature I didn't know I would get when I bought it is it has a built-in sound card that with some extra software called sound modem allows me to not have to have a TNC at all, because the packaging that I talked about, X25 packaging, is done in software. So no extra box in between, no extra box inside the transceiver, except it needs a sound card for somewhat obscure reasons, which I can try to explain if people are extra curious. But questions about this box or this diagram? So Max correctly anticipated what most of us have gravitated towards, even though I've got a couple of these things because I'm a collector of boxes. I also have a signal link, and I'm very happy with my signal link. It's what I have in my Go box for emergency communication, because even if I were to connect it to a Kenwood, if I want to send a photograph or to send other types of digital, I need a signal link. And the advantage of the signal link is you can use just about any transceiver. Doesn't have to have a built-in TNC. You don't have to go out and buy an expensive TNC. In a box that's roughly $100. You might be able to get a little bit less depending on the cabling. You get, with some free software called Sound Modem, you can simulate the TNC function in software, and you can pick up the other two types of digital modes, which are not the focus of my presentation tonight, but maybe in some other evening somebody can talk about the other digital modes that you would also use a signal link for. So it could be a cost reduction to use a signal link. That's one reason why many people have gone that way. There's a subtle other reason, and that is Sound Modem, because it's living on your laptop, gives you some additional display and lets you keep track of what's going on a little better than a TNC box. And until recently, it was Sound Modem was criticized as not being as reliable as a hardware TNC. That may still be true, but fewer people make that claim these days. I'm not sure. Another reason to consider signal link is it's compatible with a new software mode that's called Vara, which is very similar to the packet mode that I've been talking about so far, but is not literally X25 packets. And Vara is a recent innovation that's much, much faster. And you, if you have a TNC, can't use it with Vara. If you have a signal link, you can use it with Vara. So you can see why people like Max and other people that he knows and works with like the signal link. An example of a transceiver you might use with it is the FT8900, but just about any transceiver could be used with it, with an interesting wrinkle. When you buy the signal link, there's many, many models. A few of them will be at the local ham radio outlet, but there'll be some others that they may not carry. What's the difference between one model and another? Two things. The cable that comes with it that handles this connection here. Remember I said this was really a signal cable that goes both directions. It's not really two cables. That cable comes with the signal link, and you want to pick a signal link that has the cable for your transceiver. So there's a web page on the Tigertronics website, they're the manufacturer of the signal link, that lets you figure out what cable you need or what model of signal link that comes with the right cable. If you buy a signal link with a cable for today's transceiver and then 6 months later buy a different transceiver, you probably don't need a new signal link, you just need a new cable. That can save you some money. When you connect your cable, you also need to set some jumpers inside the signal link by taking its cover off. And you can save yourself some jumper headaches by spending an extra $8 or $10 and buying this little jumper chip that Tigertronics sells. But that's not required. You can use the little jumper wires that come for free with the signal link. So you can see we're getting into some semi-techie stuff, talking about jumpers and cables and such. But there are plenty of people around that would be happy to help you configure your signal link if you decide to get one. Questions about that? Well, I think I'm getting close to being out of interesting diagrams. Let's see what else I've got. I got more text, more text, more text, more text, and then I'm out of text. So I'm not going to read all this stuff. It's there for you to look at. If I go all the way to the top for a moment, I'm happy to go back to any diagram. You'll see that web address where you can find it. And I see Chris put the Tigertronics web page. I'll paste in the web address to this document one more time for your convenience. Oh, wait a minute, that just went to Max. I need to say to everyone. There it goes to everybody. So questions about anything I've covered or should have covered, or any ambiguity in all the jargon that I tossed out?
I don't know if you're going to go over this later, Bruce, but if somebody that is not familiar or doesn't have a Winlink station, what does it take to kind of put one together? Are there any best practices for putting a station together? Should it be portable? Can it be just at home?
Well, you could probably debate that one a little bit, but I would recommend getting a signal link and downloading the sound modem software that I'm pretty sure I have a link to that in this document. If not, you can Google it. Installing the sound modem software, I installed it on a Windows computer. I think people have told me that it's available for other operating systems, but I have trouble keeping track because I haven't personally done it. Winlink is very specific to Windows, but there's another program called PAT that's available for other operating systems. Doesn't have quite as many features, but will do basic email. Some people say that if you love your Mac, keep it, but buy a cheap, small laptop for your Go kit, because you're more likely to find all this ham radio software works on your cheap, small laptop. If you lose your cheap small laptop on field day, you've still got your Mac safely at home. I actually have a Mac, don't use it as often as my Windows computer, but you see the point there. Then you're going to want some help in doing this configuration. And the first time you do it, it's quite arcane. The first time that you send email with Winlink, it'll seem very confusing. The second time, less so. And then it's sort of like learning a word processor, Excel. It's got a lot of features, and every time you find a feature, it gets confusing until you've played with that feature. We, in the Portland Neighborhood Emergency Team Program, teach Winlink a couple of times a year. Don't know when the next one will be, but I'm going to guess this summer. So I will try during a calm period to paste in some information about how to get on our email list so that you'll get notices on things like that if you're here in the Portland area. There'll probably be online classes, so you could probably join them even if you're not in Portland. And what we usually do is we have breakout sessions. So we say, how many people have a sound modem? Okay, you're in breakout room A. How many people have a Yaesu with a built-in sound card? Okay, you're with Bruce in breakout room B, and how many have an actual Tigertronics TNC, you're in breakout C. And we try to have an expert that either has either experience or actual hardware on their desk. And then we help you configure your hardware if you haven't already done that. And then in either the same class or in a follow-up class, we try to kind of take you through all the various features of the Winlink program. If you're doing emergency communications, it has a bunch of built-in forms that really make it easier to send emergency messages. It's got address books, a whole bunch of different features that, again, are sort of like any computer software. They're confusing until you use them a few times. But they're, like I said, there are people that are happy to show it to you to get you across that learning curve. Follow-up questions from Max or anybody else? I see one from Chris. Is there any convention as to how far, at what frequency X25 should or should not be used? There is a way of using Winlink with a box called a Pactor box on high frequency. And I'm under the impression, but I've never checked into it, that the Pactor box implements X25 and does so using a different way of modulating and demodulating. So you can use them on HF bands where there's different bandwidths available and different noise floors. And there's now a version of VARA that works on HF, which is, I do not think VARA uses X25, but because I think the X25 packets are created on the other side of VARA, but now I'm really speculating as to how VARA works. To me, VARA is just magic. It's much faster and doesn't require TNC.
I think, Bruce,
So
if I made a comment, I think Chris is asking is there a well-known standard for a well-known frequency where people do packets? And I think the answer is for sure, since the packet communication, well, I'm not going to go into repeaters, but you want to stay away from the repeaters frequency, number one. And but there are some well-known frequencies for APRS, but that's a packet for used with the APRS systems. Other than that, it's a matter of going and using what's available.
right. In most cases, that's sorted out for you by whoever's dug into it and created a gateway. It's almost certainly going to be a ham radio club or a fairly sophisticated amateur radio operator that's dedicated a computer and a radio to and a connection to the real internet to provide a gateway. And they then pick a frequency, and hopefully they understand the Oregon, if they're here in Oregon, the Oregon band plan. That's the repeater group also helps choose gateway frequencies. And there's also a national standard from the ARRL. In my experience, the gateways are starting at one in a 2 meter band, start at about 144.9 and go up to about 145.7. But I'm just going from memory there. One of the many features of Winlink is when you first install it, even before you connect it to your radio, if your laptop is connected to the real internet, which it probably is, it can use a very old protocol called Telnet, which behind the scenes can send Winlink email without using a radio. And it can also use Telnet to go out and get a table of all the gateways that are near you, because you tell it where you are using a grid square system. And then it populates this table for you. And then you look at the table and say, oh, that one appears to be pretty much due east from here, and it's only 3 miles away. Oh, that one is northwest of here, but I know there's a hill northwest of here, and I'm not going to want to try to shoot my VHF through that hill. How about this one that's southeast of me? That's 7 miles away. That might be easy to hit. And then you can do some experiment, find your favorite gateways. And that's about an hour webinar all by itself, is choosing gateways and figuring out which ones work best for you. But each gateway will typically have its own frequency. With some exceptions, there are 2 gateways that on the east side of Portland that actually share a frequency. And the way they keep from colliding is when Winlink asks to sign in, it gives their call sign. And if it gives the call sign of the other gateway, then the one that it's not directed to, it just ignores the request. But they can only one of them can use a frequency at a time, just the same as 2 hams can't be talking at the same time on a frequency. Oh, yes, good point from Marino. A lot of stuff on YouTube about Winlink.
Yeah, I have another quick comment. Since we are lucky enough to have with us Ken, a K7ENN. Ken has been running a Winlink gateway for quite a long time, and most recently he's also put up the VARA protocol available. So Ken, can you tell us a little bit what is your setup to provide this server-side functionality, if you don't mind?
Sure, I don't mind that. I actually have HF and 2 VHF Winlink gateways operating 24/7. I have the HF is using one of the signal links. I just put my frequencies in chat and what hardware I have on them. On the HF gateway, I have one of the signal link USBs connected to an ICOM 756 Pro. And I run that at 3.597 megahertz center frequency. As well as on the VHF side, I have VARA there on 144.970, and that's using a DRA 50 sound card. So it's all sound card for VARA. It's a lot like listening to the old computer modems when you hear them talking. It's a lot of scratching and screeching when they make their initial contact, but it's all sound mode. It's not X25 at all. And then I also have a KPC3 Plus running on 145.030 at 1200 baud packet. So I have the most common abilities set up for a lot of people in MC areas, Multnomah County areas unit use it, especially during the various different exercises that happen. They try to use it on a regular basis. On the HF side, I'm supplying access for the mode called RDOP, ARDOP, as well as VARA HF. So those are always available. So yeah, I've got a 7900 for the packet station. I've got an ICOM, what is it? It's a 20 IC 2800 for the other VARA station. So other than that, that's a lot of what I have.
That's cool. So can I ask you, how many computers do you have? Do you use it to provide these free gateways?
It's all being done by my one desktop computer.
Wow, impressive. Very, very impressive. And I had the chance to use recently your VARA gateway, and it works beautifully. I'm on the south end of Southeast Portland. So thank you very much for the service that you provide.
Yeah, the VARA setup I have.
What part of Portland are you in, Ken?
I'm up by Mall 205, Southeast Portland.
So a lot of people would probably have good line of sight to your location then. And those that don't will probably find another gateway or two that they can connect depending on which mode they want to use.
Yeah, that would be correct. I actually have guys that will connect into me using VARA from Tigard. So it does pretty good over the distances. It's almost like like the WSJT software. So it does pretty well with some very low signal level and high noise floor too. So it does pretty good with that.
How much traffic do you get in your HF long distance gateway? Yeah.
It varies from month to month. This month, because I had some issues with my antenna, I only had 5 connections so far. Last month I had like 83 different connections throughout the month. So it varies depending on what kind of usage people are doing.
That's great. Thank you.
And would you be able to talk about the DRA versus the
The
signal link?
DRA 50 versus the signal link.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things with the DRA is it has some better capacitors on the output side, so it's capable of doing the higher speed VARA on VHF or UHF. The older signal links, they have had to go through and do some changes to those. They were only capable of the low speed VARA, which was still faster than packet by a long shot. But there are some of the newer signal links coming out, and they have red, as they put it, the red caps versus the black caps. Inside the signal link are capacitors and some transformers, small transformers. And one set's black. Those are the older ones, and they don't do the high speed VARA at all, because it's just, it overheats them and causes them to start letting the magic smoke out. The DRA boards were designed for all kinds of modes, and they actually have pots on them that you can adjust your output for the signal, as well as what you would do through Windows.
So while others are thinking of their questions, let me elaborate on my answer to Jim's question before. For the Portland Neighborhood Emergency Team Program, we have a lot of different hams involved. Some of them love to buy equipment and configure it with various antennas like me, and there are a bunch of people more sophisticated than me. But we have quite a few that are ham radio is more of a means to an end. They join the Neighborhood Emergency Team Program for emergency preparedness, and somebody suggested they get a technician license. It's not that hard, as we discussed early in tonight's meeting. They got themselves a license. Their first radio was $30, and maybe a year later they got a $200 radio, but it's a handheld, and they're probably not going to use Winlink right away. But if they're at a staging area, they might be moving from one place to another, and they don't want to be cabled to anything while they're helping either during an exercise or an actual deployment. So they're going to want to run audio, and they're not going to be able to go very far with their HT if in hilly Portland, unless they get real lucky. There are a few flat places in Portland. But hopefully they can connect with one station in their part of Portland. We've divided Portland into 9 regions. Each region has between 1 and 5 people that have got the equipment and expertise to run a subnet, and they serve as subnet controllers. So they can communicate with audio with all these people with their handhelds at the staging areas, or maybe something fancier than a handheld. But when they want to get messages back and forth to the Emergency Coordination Center on the east side of Portland, that is staffed by amateurs, but is in the same building as the professionals during a disaster, most of that communication would get clogged up if you tried to all do it by audio, because that operator would have to talk to 9 different subnets, each of which has dozens of messages. So we do almost all that communication with Winlink. So those operators do need Winlink expertise and Winlink equipment. So those of you who are interested in emergency communication, you don't feel like Winlink is required in the first month or even the first year, but if you want to get involved at the subnet control level, you probably want to get some Winlink equipment and expertise over time. In other parts of the world, Winlink is used in a lot of other ways, but that's the one that I'm most familiar with, and it's how I created this presentation for that particular program. I didn't create it from scratch this week. And I'm reusing some material. You can even see the dates of when I created it last year. So that could be a segue to more questions, or we can go back to any other part of my presentation. And about now, Max is getting his hook out and saying, this is supposed to be the main Q&A. It doesn't have to be about Winlink. Let's sort of open to all possible questions.
Yeah, I want to thank you very much, Bruce, for this. And in my limited experience with Winlink, I would say that it's not necessarily as easy as going and buying a radio and pressing the push to talk button and in getting into actually operating ham radio. It does require interfacing that with a computer. That being said, I really appreciate how helpful my local areas in Clackamas County has been. And I suspect that, and Bruce can comment to this, that Multnomah County areas and other organizations are very willing to sit down with people and work out any of the bugs and getting anybody that wants to get set up on Winlink up and running. So I appreciate that. Yeah, let's open it up to any and all questions. Feel free to ask questions on Winlink or any other ham radio related topics.
Okay, this is Jim. I've got a dumb question. I know there's no dumb questions, but I got one. Way back when I first encountered internet, when it was still called intranet, I was instructed, or it was brought up about how all communications on the internet are basically packets. And so is today's digital internet still packet radio, or have they moved beyond that? Over.
The internet is definitely based on packets. And I think they're all X25 packets. Somebody else can correct me on that. And one way of connecting to the main internet is also to use packets. And one of the Winlink modes is based on those X25 packets, but that's not the only way. That's why VARA is another way of connecting in. Once it gets to the gateway, when the gateway exchanges the email, it's using packets to talk to the common mode servers. And anybody with more IT experience want to either correct or elaborate?
Yeah, I would say the packet is a precursor of the internet. The people that created the internet were people that had experience in radio, and also you would say that the internet started its first moves together also with packet radio. I see that Chris asked some questions regarding that. Yeah.
Yeah, and Chris, did you get your question answered as far as how resilient it is?
Yeah, that's kind of what I was looking for, is if it does retries and whatnot. There's a bunch of follow-up questions about how how backed up can the queue get retrying, and how long will it retry, and things like that. But that it's something to dig into was kind of what I was looking for.
Great. And Ken, I know notice that you pointed out that with Winlink, you can also send small attachments through Winlink, and then you can also use templates. And so for those of you who are familiar with the ICS forms, I have not done it here, but in California, the Cupertino Aries Races group used Winlink a lot to transmit forms that were already pre-filled out. So essentially, it's almost like a paper form that's, has all the sections, and you just put in all the information and then you send it. But this is electronically. So that's one other advantage of using Winlink, is that you can send these forms without having to do it by voice. So thanks for that, Ken. Any other questions?
Sounds like Ryan has a good one. And it's a good segue to something obscure I said about using a gateway when the real internet is down. There's a way to put a gateway in what's called post office mode. And I'm not sure who chose that analogy, but I'm going to give my interpretation. Let's say this is 100 plus years ago, and you go to the post office to get your mail, and the mail is delivered by stagecoach. And if the stagecoach quits running because the bridge is out, then you're not going to be able to send and receive mail from the rest of the world, but you might still go to the post office because you wanted to exchange messages with other people on other ranches in your area. So this is Bruce's obscure way of justifying the post office mode, that if the real internet is down and we all agree on which gateway to use, we can send and receive Winlink messages to that gateway, and we can get our messages, and we're not subject to the real internet, because all we have to do is get a radio connection to that one gateway, as long as we're all using the one gateway. The downside of that is we have to wait our turn, because if we all try to use the same gateway, then it'll be like we're all trying to do a talk on the same frequency at a time. No, it'll be doubling and tripling. But there are some protocols that we're practicing here in Portland to help people know when it's their turn to use a gateway, because we want to be prepared for that big one when the internet may not be available for days or weeks.
Bruce, are there? Oh, go ahead.
Yeah. And Max just kind of when I talked about messages going from subnets to our ECC, the primary way is with the ICS 213, which we also call Form 8. So that's very similar to what you said. And we also occasionally attach comma separated spreadsheets, CSVs, that have numbers in them that represent information about situation reports. Oh, here's another mode. Richard asked about peer-to-peer. You don't have to use a gateway. If two people have Winlink hardware and software, they can choose any frequency that nobody else is using at the time, and they can communicate messages back and forth without a gateway. So that would be another way of doing it, either on a hobby basis or during emergency communication. Max, I think I interrupted you.
Oh, I was just going to ask Bruce, if in the Portland net, do you have examples of how you used Winlink to either, for an example, set up a station at a fire station or another central point? Or do you use them in other activities like supporting races or?
No, I think Multnomah County Aries may have done that. I'm also a member of them. But in my experience, the field days and the support of parades and races and et cetera is mostly voice. On the other hand, the Multnomah County Aries has Go kits that are Winlink capable. So in some exercises, we set up field locations where 2 or 3 of us will share the same Go kit, help set up antennas, et cetera. And we'll practice using Winlink or one of the other digital modes from our Go kits. With the NET program, a vast majority of cases, the Winlink capable station is at somebody's home where they're running they're serving a subnet controller. And then the emergency communication center has a radio room with 3 or 4 amateur radios that are operated by hams. Typically, those hams are part of the Multnomah County Aries Bravo team And one of those stations is a Winlink station.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome.
Any other questions on Winlink or anything else ham radio? Marino is putting in some links to YouTube. YouTube is a great place to turn if you have questions specifically on difficult to set up things like Winlink or logging or any other thing that you just have questions. There are lots and lots of videos on YouTube where they will actually walk you through step by step on how to set this up.
Yeah, I basically pasted a link of a playlist made by a guy named K4REF. He did it like a few years back. There is some of those videos are specific to some functionality of WinLink, but there is one that gives an overview. And the one that gives an overview goes off and talks the concept about gateways, peer-to-peer, and meshes and so forth that Richard was asking. So I think that should work.
Nice, thank you, Marino. Hey, Sam, did you, you sent an email to Bruce and I today about the International Red Cross and Red Cross Crescent Day. Did you want to talk about that? Oh, you're on mute.
I know.
There you go.
I'm trying to get some. My iPad died, so I'm on my phone. So that it is an International Red Cross Red Crescent, May 8th. And the link that I sent you, you have to register to participate, which it's a little convoluted, but once you register, then you're able to participate to that. And then I also put on the chat, there's a weekly Winlink Wednesday Winlink net that if you want to weekly practice, then that's one way to get weekly practice on Winlink. I was not able to finish going through the process to get onto the Red Cross May 8th so that I could talk more coherently about it. But if you want to go through that process, or if anyone wants to go through the process, then it sounds like it's an international event based on Winlink.
Great, thanks, Sam. Yeah, it sounds like, you know, Winlink is something that once you have it set up, you every once in a while just want to make sure that you continue to have it set up. And that might be something as simple as making sure your Windows software is up to date so that you don't get these pop-ups saying, hey, you need to update this, or you want to make sure sound modem is up to date, things like that. So thanks, Sam. Any other questions?
I have a question. Does anybody have any, and you could put this in the chat too, have any good reading material about the history of ham radio? I'm also like doing my research online, but if people have a favorite book or website or something, I'd be interested in seeing that.
Yeah, that's a great question. I do know that there are quite a few books actually on the history of ham radio. Ham radio, of course, goes back into the very early 1900s when amateurs were using spark gap transmitters. I don't know if you want to go all the way back to that time period. Anybody else have any books or recommendations? I will say that the ARRL, and that's ARRL.org, that might be a place just to start. They have a bookstore online that you don't necessarily have to buy it there, but that'll give you some good ideas as to what kind of books are out there. They, I'm sure, have articles. And of course, they've been publishing their magazine, which is QST, since around, I believe, 1919 or so. And every month it's published every month, and it's basically just everything ham radio, from building your own transmitter to propagation to and one thing you'll find about ham radio is that it's really an umbrella It's a hobby of hobbies. There are probably about 1,000 things or more that you can get into in ham radio, and they're all kind of different. The only real commonality is that they involve some type of a radio receiver or transmitter. But tonight we're talking about Winlink, which is very different from Morse code, which is very different from voice communication. But they're all still done, even Morse code. That's a great question, though.
Thanks. I'm thankful for the technician exam. You don't have to know Morse code nowadays.
Yes. Yeah, when I got licensed, go ahead, Bruce.
Oh, just a silly story. When my son, who's now an engineer working for Microsoft, was 12, he said he wanted to get a CB radio, and I didn't want him talking to truckers. So I said, you need a ham radio, let's learn Morse code. Unfortunately, that he wasn't that motivated. Nowadays, if I had a 12-year-old, I could probably get him a technician license and it would have worked.
That's a very good point. CB radios is a great service. It can be a little bit jungle out there, whereas ham radio, it's more of a fraternity of people who have taken a test, have some knowledge of radio. And that's, I think, why Bruce commented it kind of is a better place if you really want to be serious about it and not just yell profanities on the air.
But you can hear profanities also on ham radio.
You can.
Sometimes, unfortunately.
I put down a link about from the ARRL on the history of radio, and it looks like there's several read more links there that you can take a look at.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Yeah. Any other questions ham radio related? Cool. If not, I'm going to actually just put up our list of coming future topics. So next week is going to be field day overview. And then because field day is coming up, it's the last full weekend in June. Operating outdoors, ATN, and I don't see him on any. Oh, no, I don't see him on. He and a couple other people are going to be talking about taking your radio out outdoors, usually on top of mountains or in parks. This does a couple of things. It combines another hobby with ham radio, and it also gets you away from the electronic noise that is so pervasive in our houses and neighborhoods. We'll also talk about RF, radio frequency propagation, how radio frequency signals are transmitted through the atmosphere or reflected back depending on the frequency. Contesting, which is really fun. Essentially, it's a time and a band or bands where people get together and they try to contact as many other ham radio operators as possible. And oftentimes these contests are not just the US and Canada, or they're actually worldwide. If there are any topics that you guys want to have included in a future meeting, please let me know, because these meetings, we really want to design them for you. So if there's something that you would like to know more about, please send me an email. Put my email address up there, max@noltra.com. And if you have any comments or suggestions also, I'd be interested in finding out, is the meeting too long, too short? Do you need more resources? Things like that.